So good evening, everyone. Uh, you're most welcome to the, this is the 24th issue of our series one of our Association of Environment and Occupational Health DigiConnect webinar series. And before I proceed further, may I request our President Dr. Gajendra Kumar to give the welcome address. Dr. Gajendra Kumar.
Yes. Good evening. Am I audible?
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Welcome all to this good evening on the this web series, our web series. And today, initially, Dr. R.K. Jain will be giving us update about the COVID situation in the country, and thereafter, Dr. Tareja will be discussing about the head and neck cancers. And with these words, I hand over to Dr. Sandeep to please proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Gajendra Kumar, sir. And before I proceed further, Dr. Shyam Pingle wanted to say something. He has requested me to give some 30 seconds.
Please, he is most welcome.
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Yes.
Yes, you are.
I only wanted to wish our dynamic moderator, organizing secretary, and the force behind this exercise a very happy birthday.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
It happens to be birthday of Dr. Sandeep Sharma.
Okay.
And the beauty is he has kept his group, our group on mute, of which he is the moderator, so that nobody could wish him in the group, because in the group if one wishes, then everybody knows about it. So I appreciate his sticking to the whatever he has decided, even at this cost. So Dr. Sandeep, we really appreciate the good work, great work that you are doing in the field of occupational health, as well as for IOH, both center as well as Delhi branch. And we wish you all the very best, a successful career, a successful life, and we look for more and more contribution from you. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Pingle, sir. Your all wishes are with us and with me, especially today, sir. Thank you very much. And let me continue with our program, sir. Today is 5th September, and we have 24th issue of our this DigiConnect webinar series. And as you all know, we have started this COVID-19 EPID updates from last few weeks, and this will be given by our Senior Vice President, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, and he will tell us about the evolving situation of COVID-19 in India and abroad, sir. So, floor is of Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain. He can start his presentation, sir. Dr. Rajiv Jain, sir. You're mute, sir. You're not audible, Dr. Rajiv.
Even his video is being stopped.
Actually, there is some connectivity problem. So,
am I audible now?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes, you are audible now, sir. You can share your screen and start the presentation.
There is some link problem.
So your voice is breaking.
I think there is some internet problem, because this photograph is also fixed. It is not a video, it is a fixed photograph.
Yeah.
Okay.
or else what we can do, we can start with the main presenter and let Dr. Jain brief us in the last.
Yeah, that we have to just give me 1 minute, sir. Okay, then, sir, what we'll do, sir, we'll start with our guest speaker. And our guest speaker today is Dr. Vikas Talreja. And Dr. Vikas Talreja is a renowned medical oncologist, is a consultant in the Department of Oncology and Hematology at Safdarjung Hospital. And he is here to deliver on the topic improving outcomes in locally advanced head and neck cancer, current landscape. Dr. Talreja is a postgraduate BM in medical oncology from Homi Bhabha National Institute from Mumbai. And he is DM in internal medicine, Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University from Delhi. He has graduated from Indraprasth University, Delhi only. And he has his skills in medical oncology, chemotherapeutic drugs, medical oncological emergencies, cancer treatment, and he has got clinical experience in chemotherapy, both curative and palliative settings. Last session we had last week on head and neck cancers only, and that was by Dr. Tejas Pandya, and he was a radiation oncologist basically. So we had discussed a lot about the epidemiology of the head and neck cancers, the diagnosis and the radiological management of this, radiotherapy management of this head and neck cancer. Now, because medical oncology is also a special part of this treatment strategy, and we would request Dr. Vikas Talreja to start his presentation by sharing his screen. Dr. Talreja.
Thank you. Am I audible and am I visible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for the kind words and welcome all. It is humble to be among the esteemed of large eminent persons, and I believe we are discussing this because of the rampant problem which we are facing every day over the past many years for the locally advanced head and neck cancers. So I will be very brief and will be to the point. I will just mention about the epidemiology as it has been briefly discussed in the past. What are the risk factors, especially related to the human papilloma virus? A brief overview of the staging. What has been evolving when I started the practice, and what right now, what's the trend of the locally advanced squamous cell head and neck cancers? What we usually do for these patients, the chemoradiotherapies, the induction chemoradiotherapies, and the targeted therapies in the locally advanced head and neck cancer. So first, the epidemiology, as it has been previously discussed, I wouldn't like to pursue more, but then again, as you can see, India is being one of the hotbeds where the head and neck cancer is so much rampant. And that's why the data and everything is very important, because we are the source of a large amount of patients whom we treat head and neck cancers. So when this Globocan data was released, and you could see how much was the incidence, it ranked nearly the 17th, and it ranked in the number of the deaths, the 16th of the head neck cancers. And out of all of the above cancers, believe me, it's one of the worst to have in for everybody. So you could see that the red signal doesn't come because it is just a color. It's because it is not only a color, it's a quite a rampant problem, as well as it is a very lethal disease to have it. Among the preventable risk factors which you could look for the head neck cancers, most of them are attributable to the tobacco. in form of any form. You take it either the smoking, betel nuts, erica, canny, the attributive factor could be anything, but it has a tobacco content to it. And when alcohol taken in conjunction with the tobacco, it has a more than a synthetic lethality. So the factors accumulate over it, and among them also, when we see the HPV factor is another factor, the human papilloma virus, which also attributes to the head neck cancer. The radiation exposure, as well as with cumulative age and the ultraviolet light not being much common in India, but among the most of the Indians, the locally head neck cancers, either tobacco, alcohol, or the conjunction of them have been the major of them. And HPV infection, which we have already seen with the cervical cancer, is also one of the most common associated with the oropharynx subset. In Western literature, the oropharynx subset is quite common because of the increase in the HPV positivity. There has an incidence of increase because there are more and more screening of the HPV being there. Uh, the HPV subset of the oral head neck cancer, when you deal, they have a tendency to occur younger. And when you deal with the strain of especially the P16, there's an increased risk of oropharyngeal cancer with it. And HPV positive cancers are invariably meaning, since it is a westernized concept, therefore they usually respond very well to the treatment outcomes, and the survival is very good as compared to the HPV negative. In the Asian and the Southeast Asian, you could see the HPV incidence is not as great as the Western subset, but still it is one of the common factors which we see in the head neck cancers. So when we deal with the HPV subset, you see that there's an improve in the response in the patients receiving the chemoradiations and the conventional radiations. And usually when you have the smoking is associated with lower OS, the lower PFS. In terms of distance metastasis, there is no difference between the HPV positivity or the negativity. The next thing which you have to discuss is the cancer staging, the head neck cancer staging. It's pretty similar across the subsets, but when we deal, we have to segregate a nasopharyngeal subset as a separate subset because of its very good prognosis as compared to the rest of the head neck cancer staging. Uh, at, at stage 0 is just a carcinoma in situ, usually precancerous lesions detected over a period of time is the stage 0, and most of them are detected because of the non-healing ulcers, not very much common in India. Even though we have a preventive oncology department across many hospitals where these are being picked up, but still the Western literature is rampant of the stage 0 cancers. The stage 1 and 2 are basically on the size of it, that whether it is a less than 2 centimeter or more than 2 and less than 4 centimeter, but it hasn't metastasized to the local lymph nodes. But when it metastasizes to the local regional lymph nodes, which are the draining lymph node, it becomes a stage 3 cancer. And stage 4 is more of an advanced head neck cancer when it has left its primary head neck origin and has metastasized beyond the head neck region. That's the stage 4 lung cancer. It's just a broad heading. We have a T, we have an N, we have an M for it. T is based on usually the size and the local structures. So you have a different T for a lip, you have a different T for a tongue, you have a different T for oropharynx, hypopharynx, larynx, and the whole subsets for it. And you have a different N for it, you have a different M for it. So for each and every subset, there is a defined T. What I have told is a broader feature of it. And just like the detection has evolved over a time, so has the treatment evolved in the management of the locally advanced squamous cell head neck cancers. Uh, Believe me, when at one point of time when it was started, it was just a death sentence to have a locally advanced squamous cell head neck cancer. But right now, people are living long term with it, and they are living with a quality of life with as normal as it could be. From an advanced palliative situation, people have now changed their outlook to more as near normal as it could be. Uh, 1980s when it was started, the first concept of induction chemotherapy came. The cisplatin 5-FU, the drugs were used, followed by the radio sensitization. Then the famous trial of you can preserve the voice of the patient of head neck cancer. That was one of the pioneer landmarks of the trial, which was reciprocated by the EORTC trial, that giving a treatment of an induction therapy and a triple modality treatment, you could basically preserve the voice of the patients, and uh, uh, that had drastically changed the concept of management of the head neck cancers. Then in 2004, the classic uh, Vermocon trial came, where the adjuvant situation was determined. The adjuvant is any treatment which we give post the definitive treatment. So post the surgery, it is post-op treatment, or that's the adjuvant treatment where you combine the chemo and the radiation together. And then subsequently, it has been an addition of how we can make it better, how can we can make the reduce chances of progression, how we can increase the life of the patient, and how we can uh, make it to give the best to the patient. Uh, this was especially important in 2007 when the induction chemotherapy was used, the TPF chemotherapy, and which became a standard treatment which hasn't been replaced till 2020 for any other treatment. Now, last few years, we see two major drugs, that is cetuximab and nimotuzumab. The Lancet into 2010 showed that when you give a targeted therapy with radiation to those patients who cannot tolerate or are not eligible for chemotherapy, you achieve an equally good survival with the cetuximab and with a better quality of life than it was similarly demonstrated in our paper, which we did on nimotuzumab, around more than 500 patients, randomized trial, and we said we found that addition of nimotuzumab reduces the events as well as had a better quality of life. So the concept of concurrent chemo and radiation together. So what uh, the concept is basically, you for a localized stage 3, stage 4 squamous cell carcinomas of head neck, you randomize them giving a radiation alone, and you give another subset, the chemo and the radiation, and it had a fairly well balanced group of oropharynx, hypopharynx, larynx, and the radiation is usually given on 1.8 to 2 gray per fraction. That means total give you have to give 66 to 72 gray. That is over a period of 30 to 35 days. And chemotherapy is the cisplatin 5-FU. The cisplatin is given on 20 milligram per meter square per day for day 1 to 4, and 5-FU 1000 milligram per meter square per day from 22 to 25th day. After this, usually most of them have a complete response. For those who don't have a complete response, have a residual disease, or even after achieving a complete response, there's a local recurrence, you go for the surgery. So that's the triple modality treatment. And when you look at this, you see uh, how many patients are surviving. That's the primary endpoint which you look out of it. So if you give only radiation, what happens is at 5-year hallmark figure you take, 50% survive, 50% have survival of a relapse-free survival. Those who haven't had a distance metastasis, 75% of them will survive. Those where the surgery hadn't been contemplated, 34% of them would have survived, and 45% would have survived with local control without any resection being necessary. When you give concurrent chemo and radiation, the survival is more and less similar, that is 50% do survive, but look at the relapse-free survival. It means that 62%, and the p-value of the difference between the radiation and the chemo radiation is less than 0.05, which means it is a significant p-value, which means that there is reduced risk of any events when you give concurrent chemo radiation. And similarly is when you give the combination of the therapy, there is better OS with the primary site being preserved. There's a better local control without resection. And why is this important? Because there is a survival, no doubt better, but at the same time, there is a better local control, as well as the primary site being more and more preservation. So for those, just to give an idea, when you have the preserved larynx in yourself, that's the next trial which we are going to give, or we are going to discuss, is an organ preservation is as important as the way we breathe, the way we eat, the way we talk. Because for a person, larynx is a very important organ. You take out the larynx, you took his voice, you took half his quality of life. So that's why it is very important that that larynx needs to be preserved. He can talk, he can shelve out his emotions inside out, and that's why it is very important that that's why I am using this word organ preservation a lot, because it's not only talking, it's swallowing, it's better, it's an emotional, it's a psychological, as well as it's a whole new physical dimension to it. So in this trial, the RTOG 9111 trial, again, the larynx cancers were taken, the squamous cell carcinomas with usually stage 2 to stage 3, stage 3 to stage 4, sorry, and they were randomized into a group where radiation alone was given, a radiation and chemotherapy was given, and the chemotherapy was either the cisplatin or the cisplatin and the 5-FU. So the primary endpoint in this trial was that the patient should have an intact larynx at the end of the treatment. That is, he should be able to talk, that larynx should not be removed out. The only way we remove a larynx is when there is a residual disease, when the response is not the same, or there is a progression of the primary when you give the treatment. The secondary endpoints were the survival, the disease-free survival, the local control, the local regional control, and the metastasis, the time to the distance metastasis. So when you look at the curves, that's very important. The radiation with the concurrent chemotherapy had the maximum laryngeal preservation. The radiation alone had a minimum laryngeal preservation. And you could see that those where you gave a chemotherapy followed by radiation had a better laryngeal preservation than the radiation therapy. When you give chemotherapy with the radiation had a better laryngeal preservation than you give chemotherapy followed by the radiotherapy. And similarly was the loco-regional control, where the concurrent chemoradiation had a better loco-regional control as compared to the radiotherapy alone. So simply giving radiation is not going to be enough, as you could see from the RTOG 9111 trial, the laryngeal preservation rates were much higher. So it was in the terms of 72 and 84% when you add the chemotherapy to the radiation group. So it means that delaying that radiation is also not going to benefit. When you give any systemic therapy, the radiation is going to add on its benefit, and this means there is an increase in the survival, which means the overall survival, the disease-free survival, as well as the laryngectomy-free survival for a person with a locally advanced laryngeal cancer. So it's just not the radiation. Giving radiation is just the inferiorest thing you can give. You have to add the chemotherapy to the group to make that larynx preserve at the end of the treatment. Now, when we look at the sequential therapy, basically the induction chemotherapy. The induction chemotherapy or the induction chemo radiation is basically whatever the treatment you give before the definitive treatment you are going to deliver. So it's also known as the new adjuvant treatment, and it has been always associated with a survival value, and it's a very valuable treatment option. The ideal regimen was the TPF, as I said. It was basically the history of it was that it was started earlier by the Wayne State University regimen, where the cisplatin was 100 milligram per meter square and the 5-FU was 1000 milligram per meter square per day for 5 days. It was modified by the Vermoken, who in his pioneer paper in NAGM made it the TPF regimen, where he added that addition of docetaxel to this backbone of cisplatin and 5-FU has a better efficacy. And this was further put into multiple of the trials. So in the Western place, when they do a multi-center trial, they have organized themselves into the head neck cancer group, and the organization is the EORTC, the European Research and Treatment of the Cancer, and they conducted multiple of these. So TEX 323, 24971, these are the 2-3 trials where they compared it, and they found that the TPF regimen, and that is addition of docetaxel to the cisplatin 5-FU backbone in the doses of 75, 75 and 750 milligram per meter square, and they followed over the unresectable head neck cancers. You see that the TPF performed much more better as compared to the PF alone. So the median progression-free survival, as well as the overall survival, the 1 year, 2 year and the 3 year survival were better with the TPF regimen as compared to the PF regimen alone. So this was also translated into the overall survival. You could see that the curves are separating a lot. Hazard ratio means 0.73, which means there was a 27% reduced risk of death when you give TPF regimen as compared to PF regimen. On an average, when you give the triple drug regimen, patients had an 18.8 months overall survival with TPF as compared to the PF. When you look at crude values of it, at 3 years, 37% of the patients do survive with TPF, while only 26% of the patients do survive with PF alone. So that's why the addition of taxane has been had been a controversial issue, but it was resolved much more by the Vermoken studies, where among all his trials between 323, 324 and the GOTEC trial, they say there was a addition of taxanes to the induction chemotherapy, had a survival benefit, had a PFS benefit, had a better laryngectomy, laryngeal preservation rates as compared to giving the chemotherapy alone. And that's why the triple drug is now a favored regimen amongst the most medical oncologists. But all of these regimens are not that much simple. With TPF comes more febrile neutropenias, more leukopenias, more neutropenias, and also infectious complications. But if you give them a proper management and a proper care, so that complications can be managed, and treatment does get interrupted and delayed with the TPF regimen, but then it is much very well controlled under the hands of an expert person who is delivering that therapy. And you have to be very careful because you are giving a cisplatin, you are giving a 5-FU, and you are giving a taxane together. So the heart needs to be monitored. The ears, they are ototoxic, so the ears needs to be monitored. The vestibular function needs to be seen. It's causes a lot of metabolic derangements. Monitor the sugars, monitor the lipid profile, thyroid profile, as well as you have to monitor the kidney functions, the cardiac functions. Now, when you treat the head neck cancer, many of us have evolved from giving a blanket therapy to a targeted treatment. And when you look at the head neck cancer per se, how it has evolved, so for any cancer to survive, or to become from a cell to a cancer, the 4 steps it has to be marked, which is the survival, the angiogenesis, the proliferation, and invasion. So from the story of for a cell to be a normal, to become an abnormal cell, these 4 stages or landmarks it has to cross. And that's why it is essential that we put a checkpoint to these landmarks so that we can control or we can reverse from an abnormal cell to become a normal cell. And these hallmarks are regulated by a number of uh, receptors, which includes especially the VEGFR, which is hallmark for the angiogenesis, the Notch, the TKR, the integrins, which are especially for the angiogenesis as well as the proliferation, the EGFR. The EGFR is one of the hallmarks which has a down regulation to the SOS, RAS, MEK, and mitogen activated phosphokinase pathway. And through all these pathways, it leads to intranuclear gene transcription, from which it gives the cell signal to become proliferate. And where, among the head neck cancers, when you see that when there is an EGFR expression, it's associated with a worse prognosis. It's a poorer local control. So those who have an EGFR expression, 5 years, only 25% of them survive, while those who don't have an EGFR expression, 81% do survive after any definitive treatment. And across the trials, you see with more and more EGFR expression, it is shown as an independent prognostic value for an overall survival, for a disease-free survival, for a local regional relapse. Now, where does the cetuximab play in the concurrent chemoradiation? So the first trial, the RTOG 522, which randomized patients based on the concurrent chemoradiation plus the cetuximab. Cetuximab is considered as an EGFR inhibitor. So when you add the EGFR inhibitor to the concurrent chemoradiation, the first trial was a negative trial. There was no improvement in the OS and the PFS. The second trial, where the cetuximab was added with the chemotherapy and the radiation boost was also given, again, overall survival and the PFS survival looks similar. It was stopped because SAEs were occurring quite frequently. Among the 22 patients which were in the phase 2 trials, 2 had died because of the SAEs. And again, in the third trial, also the similar results were expected. So when you give with the chemoradiation, it is not that much beneficial. But this was a landmark study by the Bonner, which said that when you add cetuximab to the radiation, in those who cannot tolerate the chemotherapy. So most of those patients either chemo eligible or they were not. A lot of those patients try to understand either because of their heart functions, uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled hypertension, had an episode of vestibular dysfunctions, are moderate or severe, deaf, or are having a deranged lipid profile, a deranged thyroid profile, a chronic kidney disease, a chronic liver disease, uh, creatinine raised because of any causes, becomes chemotherapy ineligible. And then you have to find out an alternative measure to give, that you have to give certain therapy which is superior to the radiation but not as toxic to as chemotherapy. And you have the answer for that is the cetuximab, where the addition of the chemo ineligible patients, you give cetuximab, there is an overall survival benefit over the radiation alone. So those which were given cetuximab plus radiation, the median overall survival was nearly double, 50 months, as compared to 29.3 months with radiation alone group. Now, this was the trial which is an Indian data on the Indian patients, the nimotuzumab. It was the anti-EGFR, which had a, when you give along with the chemo radiation, and you have a survival benefit, you have a local regional benefit, and you have a systemic benefit also. So nimotuzumab is basically an IgG antibody which binds to the EGFR. It's just like the structure is similar to any other antibodies, the IgG we have. And this was first of all demonstrated in the Manipal, the Mangalore, where they did a phase 2 data, and it was later done on a phase 3 fashion. So addition of nimotuzumab to the radiation, you see there was a significant overall response rate with 100% with nimotuzumab as compared to the 70% giving chemo and radiation alone. And this was also seen at seen at 6 months. This was the overall survival. That 5-year overall survival was not reached in terms of the median overall survival was not reached with the chemo radiation and addition of the nimotuzumab as compared to the chemo radiation alone, a significant p-value. And you could see that on an average, if you look the 5-year benchmark, chemo radiation around, you could see 26% of patients do survive, while with the chemo radiation and the nimotuzumab, 57% of the patients do survive. So the hazard ratio was quite significant, 0.356, which means there is a 65% reduced risk of death when you add nimotuzumab to the chemo radiation group. So even though they are chemo eligible, you have the option of addition of nimotuzumab to the chemo radiation group, and there was a survival benefit with it also. And this was the study which was done by our mentor, Dr. Kumar Prabhash, at Tata Memorial Hospital, where we were among the co-workers with him. And what we did was we randomized around 500 out of odd patients, newly diagnosed squamous cell head neck cancers, non-metastatic. The locally advanced head neck cancers were subdivided into oropharynx, larynx, hypopharynx, oral cavity, and any treatment prior was given an exclusion for it. We randomized in cisplatin radiation versus cisplatin radiation and the nimotuzumab. Nimotuzumab was given 200 milligram every weekly basis, and we gave the chemotherapy on a weekly basis because most of the Indian patients are quite fragile. They are poor nutrition built, and they can't tolerate the 3 weekly regimens of the Western peak population. So, and the supportive care is also that much not extensive as compared to the Western population. And you look at the primary endpoint, which is the PFS. The secondary endpoints were the disease-free survival, the loco-regional survival, the overall survival, the treatment compliance, the adverse events, and the quality of life. Now, when you see since it was a randomized trial, so all the factors were equally distributed between the chemoradiation and the nimotuzumab arm. And similarly, the treatment delivery also, you could see that most of the patients could complete, nearly 80% of them could complete the 7 scheduled cycles of the chemoradiation. So look at the primary endpoint. This is the curve of the nimotuzumab. I'm sorry. Yeah. This is the curve of the nimotuzumab chemoradiation, and this is the curve of the chemoradiation alone. With 2 year being a target, you see 61%, 62 nearly of them were surviving without a progression with nimotuzumab chemoradiation, as compared to 50% of the patients who were on chemoradiation alone. And you could see this had a significant p-value. Hazard ratio being 0.69 means there's a 31% reduced risk of progression when you add nimotuzumab to the chemotherapy arm. So PFS was significantly longer with those patients who received nimotuzumab chemoradiation, and especially those who the delivery of cisplatin was more than 200 milligram per meter square. The benefit of nimotuzumab was also observed. This means those who could take the 7th cycle of the cisplatin with it. Now, this is the forest plot, which shows that this is the unity line, and I'm sorry, and this is the curves. Anything which is left to the unity line means it is favoring the nimotuzumab cisplatin combination. Anything which is right to the unity line, which it favors the cisplatin. So you could see the nimotuzumab cisplatin was benefiting age below 60, age 60 and above. The oropharynx, the non-oropharynx, stage 3, stage 4, whether the radiation was used as a conventional or it was used as an MRT. So all across the subgroups, you could see that there was a significant hazard ratio, 0.65, 0.8, all were less than 1. So the addition of nimotuzumab had a consistent benefit across all subgroups. Similarly, with the DFS, 2 years, 60%. With chemoradiation, it was only 48.5%. There was a 29% reduced risk of disease recurrence when you give nimotuzumab as compared to nimotuzumab as given compared to chemoradiation alone. So when you give a therapy, you also look as a loco-regional control. How much are the chances of the local recurrence of the disease? With nimotuzumab, 67.5% at the end of 2 years didn't have a local recurrence, while 57.6% of the control population of the chemoradiation had didn't have a recurrence. So in and all means the hazard ratio of 0.67, which means there is 33% reduced risk of local recurrence when you give nimotuzumab as compared to the chemoradiation. The secondary endpoint was the overall survival, and you could see that even though the median events hadn't occurred, but still there was the 2-year overall survival of 0.84, which means there was 16% reduced risk of death when you give nimotuzumab plus the chemoradiation. very few therapies in head neck cancers have an overall survival benefit, and this is one of them. The patients who received a cumulative cisplatin of more than 200 milligram per meter square also had a impact and an overall survival benefit. And this is one of the worst performing groups across the Western literature. You could see that those with HPV negative oropharyngeal cancers, the survival rates are very poor. And among our trial also, you could see the HPV negative oropharyngeal cancers, the 2-year PFS was 25.7%, wherein the hazard ratio was 0.54, which means there was a 46% reduced risk of progression when you give nimotuzumab chemoradiation with HPV negative oropharyngeal cancers. With HPV negative oropharyngeal cancers, there was a better locoregional control, that is by nearly increased by 19%. And you could see that the hazard ratio was 61%, which means there was a 39% reduced risk of locoregional occurrences, and with hazard ratio of 0.63 in the overall survival of 2 years, which means it reduces the chances of death by 37%. So all of these, the subgroups, when you see the PFS, the locoregional control, and the median overall survival, you could see they were all three were having a significant p-values with nearly doubling of the PFS, the doubling of locoregional control, the doubling of overall survival. So with chemoradiation 19, with 19 months was the overall survival, the locoregional control was 17 months, and the PFS was 13 months. With addition of nimotuzumab, you could increase the PFS from 13 to 35, the locoregional control from 17 to 60 months. So from a less than 2 year, you can make it more than 5 year, the survival benefit and the overall survival also. Even though the addition had a survival benefit, a locoregional control, and a better reduced risk of disease recurrence, it is associated with slight amount of toxicities. The mucositis, which was significantly higher in the nimotuzumab chemoradiation group as compared to the chemoradiation alone, and the hospitalization, which is usually the grade 3 or grade 5 toxicities, it is slightly more, especially since it's an EGFR inhibitor. So it is expected that the toxicities were slightly more. But when you give cetuximab, you have to look at these below figures: the hyponatremia, the hypokalemia, the hypomagnesemia, the hypophosphatemia, which are more common with the cetuximab. They weren't that much significant with the nimotuzumab addition. So the nimotuzumab was the first anti-EGFR to be proven efficacious in the locally advanced squamous cell head neck cancers. It had a better PFS with the nimotuzumab chemoradiation. The addition of the nimotuzumab to the chemoradiation reduced the hazard of progression by 31%. The nimotuzumab in combination with the cisplatin radiation had a better PFS by 11.7%. For those with a oropharyngeal subsite, the 2-year PFS was significantly better with the nimotuzumab plus chemoradiation by a figure of 25.7%, and the PFS was also higher with the hazard ratio of 0.73. So this has been the overall treatment flow. All questions welcome from my side.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vikas. Dr. Vikas, I'm sorry I couldn't introduce you all to our group. We are all industrial physicians, occupational physicians from different industries, and public health physicians across India. And we are an association of about 3,000 occupational health and public health physicians and industrial physicians. So they have all joined from across India, and they might be having some questions with you. And you have given a very enthralling presentation, and right from the epidemiology staging to the treatment part, and with the concurrent chemoradiotherapy and the metronomic this chemotherapy, there are a lot of questions might be there, because as you have already told, and we also know that head and neck cancer is more prevalent in low socioeconomic people, and because of the lifestyle or because of some nutritional factors or the HPV infection. And it is definitely a very sad disease to have, because it changes the whole lifestyle, because it may alter your breathing things and swallowing, your facial deformity, and laryngeal, you told laryngeal preservation is very important, because if you lose your speech, then your life is a hell. So there are a lot of new radio and chemotherapies are now available, but I think they are very costly. And how is there any ways you are all coming out with so that it is affordable to the masses? Because right now it is not affordable by the general public. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. The treatment per se is very costly for many of our patients, but uh, on a good side, that right now, that is, uh, we recently conducted a trial in Tata, where we were able to randomize patients who had failed chemotherapy, had relapse. We gave them simple tablets of erlotinib, methotrexate, celecoxib, and we found out that even though they were refractory to the chemotherapies, they had a meaningful uh, overall survival and a progression-free survival benefit. Uh, for those who are affordable, immunotherapies and target therapies are an option. For those who aren't affordable, there are other form of treatments that we look forward, right? But it's not the end of the tunnel. There are lots of evolving therapies. There are lots of targets that we are targeting right now, and the whole uh, outlook towards the head neck cancer has changed drastically over last 3 to 5 years.
Okay. And it is better to have a diagnosis at a very early stage, or at a pre-malignant stage, so that we can prevent a lot of the hardships which patient undergoes, or the doctor undergoes, or the family undergoes. So are you having some screening strategies for diagnosing this particular head and neck cancers?
We as a matter of fact, yes, because we've when we started a decade back, we were having a lot of issues that they were coming in a very late stage, in an advanced stage, probably because they were being underdiagnosed, or uh, they were referred early, but then they came in a they are in a very remote areas. So by the time they reached a tertiary care hospital, which was equipped with these facilities, the disease had already spread. But right now, what we are doing is to establish a lot of preventive oncology centers across India. What the function of these preventive oncology centers are is they give a habit of de-addiction to most of the people, so that at the primitive level only you can control uh, the the risk. If there is a pre-malignant change, they keep the patients on the observation and do the required therapeutic uh, changes to be done. And that's why a lot of in situs, a stage 0, a pre-malignant cancers are being rightly diagnosed. So right now there are a lot of uh, preventive oncology centers, especially across the tertiary care hospitals. So every state right now with their hospital has a preventive oncology center at their hospital right now. But it will the policy is to increase the number of them, and to give a better care to everybody. The curriculum also has been changed to make a more to introduce preventive oncology as a separate branch in the MD, also to make it more accessible. Even now the fellowships are being also are being given to many of the medicines, the community medicine people out there, to make more and more workforce for them to detect early, because a lot of these pre-malignant changes keep on harboring a non-healing ulcer, change in the redness, the erythroplakias, the leukoplakias, the submucous fibrosis. All of these keep on happening, and many of time they are brought to a state when they have become an overt malignant proliferative disease. So I believe, but at the same time, you have to intervene, you have to counsel them for the de-addictions and all those things. And that's why it's not a single day, but it's an evolving process, and possibly in future we would have a better training with it.
I think sensitization of dentists will also help a lot in this matter, because they are the first to thoroughly examine the oral cavity.
I totally agree. I totally agree with the doctors. So the dentists are the first person where the patients do come to, because it's usually the tooth that they attribute that factor to, that the ulcer is because of the tooth, and they are the first ones who feel, who point it out.
Exactly.
It's not the tooth, it's the cancer that has in an early stage that has been picked. And I totally agree with that also.
Dr. Vikas, I have got two questions. Dr. Sandeep, can I take questions?
Yeah, sure.
I have got two questions.
Dr. Gajen Kumar is the president of our Delhi branch, sir.
My question number one is, what is the prevalence of HPV positive cases in head and neck cancer in India vis-a-vis the Europe or the other part of the world? This is one. And if it is so, there is a difference, then what is the reason? And my second question is, you have said in one of your slides that even taking simple alcohol, even without smoking, it is a causative. So what is the amount and what is the frequency of the alcohol, which will be dangerous? So that, this pre-COVID area, all the medical conferences normally end with a cocktail party and everybody is taking alcohol. So there must be some clarity on the issue, what amount and what is the frequency of alcohol, which is damaging and which is safe. These are my two questions.
Thank you for those questions. I totally agree with you. The first question was the HPV status. So what we have seen in our registries and compared with the Western registries, usually the Western registries show that the prevalence is in nearly 50-50%. So, and more of a 60-40, if you say, the HPV positive in them is much more prevalent. In our subset, it's basically it's the reversal. What we have seen as when we did our trial, 80% were HPV negative as compared to 20% being HPV positive. And we were also surprised with that figure. So you took 500 patients, you randomize them, you don't know their HPV status. So it's a blind thing that you see, and you look at the prevalent, the HPV status. That gives that you can attribute to the general population. Possibly what we could see was that smoking was inversely related to the HPV status. We could also find out that the Indian population also, it was more attributable to the oral habits they had. And why the prevalence is difference between the Indian and the Western of the HPV, don't know, but we have a definite virulent form of locally head neck cancers, and that's why our biology isn't the same of the Western. So they have, when you look at their control population of those graphs, the survival is much better as compared to our population control graphs, where you give either a radiation alone or a chemo alone. You see that the curves fall early, and the patients die very early. And our patients are also very, when they come, the Western literature usually shows that they come in a very early stages. Ours is usually those T4 bad proliferative fungating masses, which are which are diagnosed in Western as a isolated case reports of that. So the biology is completely different. I will definitely agree with you. The alcohol part per se, it is when you give them per se the dosing and the
How frequently?
the frequency, it is not uh, measured, but anything which is considered in the epidemiology as as a drinking problem, I would say that it would be affecting your social, affecting your physical and the metabolic profile, because when you give the smoking, you have the peck ears. When you have the gutkhas and the oral tobaccos, which are more lethal, uh, when you consider as a individual risk factors, it does come out to be that those who are alcoholic right now, uh, they are also having a significant association with it. But when you consider in these trials or in the registries, the simple question they ask is whether you have taken alcohol, yes or no, and whether you are a current alcoholic or you are a former alcoholic. So defining those quantities of alcohol, I suppose it would be difficult, and I would definitely say that per se it is very rare to find out. Only those who have taken alcohol alone would be attributing to it. But alcohol, well combined with the cigarette smoking as well as the oral, is the most lethal form.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what Dr. Vikas, you have used the word synthetic legality of the alcohol. That is important, yes. So, Dr. Vikas, you have told about cetuximab and nimotuzumab. They are anti-EGFR. What is the role of this nivolumab? Nivolumab, which is in, yeah, that you can throw some light on this.
So nivolumab, pembrolizumab, atezolizumab, these are three of the PD-1 and the PD-L1 inhibitors. They together are combined under an umbrella term of immunotherapy right now. And what it does is, these are the characteristics of these tumor cells are they express certain antibodies which mimics as the normal cells. And what it does, the immune system of our body doesn't recognize this cancer as a cancer. These antibodies, these nivolumab, pembrolizumab, what it does, it binds to these antigen presenting cells. They unmask that foreignness, and what they modulates is they modulate our immune system in such a way that these cancer cells are recognized as a foreign antigens. So it's a way that our immune system is recognizing these antigens as a foreign antigens, and that's why they are inhibiting those, they are destroying them. So it is attacking at the level where the cancer cells evade the immune system. The immunotherapy acts on this. The benefit of that is, when you give chemotherapies, it's a non-selective therapy. So it kills maximum of. With immunotherapy, since the immune system is activated, it's our own system, so the side effects are much lesser as compared to it. And sometimes the responses are long lasting. So when you give, suppose 100 patients this immunotherapy, a quarter of them keeps on responding, and they keep on responding and responding and responding, because the immune system has recognized that cancer antigen as a foreign antigen. And the best thing is that many of the stage 4 cancers, stage 4 lung cancer, stage 4 colorectal, stage 4 head neck cancer, has now become a curable malignancies, because the immune system has been modulated by the immunotherapy to such an extent that the system has been that the effect is long lasting, and even after 4 years, 5 years, a stage 4 patient keeps on surviving. Yes, the cost is prohibition for them, and we are looking for an alternative doses and alternative schedules of this therapy, and that is a very promising therapy across.
So, Dr. Vikas, one last question from you from my side. Like we are in the midst of this COVID situation, and you know that COVID is a such a deadly virus now, and it affects our immunity, and everything depends upon the how our immunity is strong, how much we are resistant to this particular infection. And we know that our oncology patients, especially this cancer patient, they are very, their immunity is low, especially when they are on treatment. And if you find some COVID positive patient, who is on some chemotherapy or radiotherapy or some treatment is going on, so how you deal with these cases, and how is it affecting your this normal regime of treatments?
I would say yes, because see, COVID virus per se doesn't do much, but what it does, it is causes an inflammatory cytokine out of our body. It releases a sandstorm of that sort. So for that, if for our patients who are already immunocompromised, the best would be to hold our horses during that time, to sit back, to wait for that storm to resolve. And when it is demonstrated that the COVID is negative for the patient, then only we restart our therapy. It's like an emergency. What you say, you halt for a time. You don't give your chemotherapies, you don't give your radiation, because the lung is among the storm right now. So for asymptomatic patients also, even though the storm is not overtly visible, but we don't know what they are harboring inside. So we also wait till the time the COVID becomes negative, and then only we initiate the treatment. Some of the times it's a life threatening. Suppose a tumor is on the trachea, some is on it, which is impending, or the patient is in stridor, then you think of doing those as an exceptional circumstances. Otherwise, chemotherapies and others are not an essential therapies, and it can be delayed or interrupted because of the COVID
So
signs.
in addition to COVID testing, are you also monitoring the inflammatory markers also?
Would love to, but the logistics don't permit us. But yes, would love to, because there is a positive uh, uh, correlation between probably the IL-6 and the fibrinogen levels and the D-dimer levels, but the logistics don't permit it, and that's why it gives the CRPs. We don't usually do it, but yes, it could be used as a surrogate marker for looking inside whether the patient is safe for the therapy or not.
So, Dr. Vikas, we are joined by, as I told you, we are joined by senior panelists from our association across India. So, I would request all the panelists, if they have any question, they can unmute themselves and they can ask the question from Dr. Vikas. Dr. Shanbag, sir.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandeep, and wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you, sir.
Vikas ji, thank you very much for a nice, beautiful presentation, making the subject very simple for non-specialists like us. I agree with you that, this is costly and something in the industry, probably industry will afford it. I have a different question. Has any, you have also presented everything, the endpoint being survival rates. Has any studies been done on the quality of life during and post-treatment of chemo, radiation, and all these things, on the quality of life? How early they return back to work? How many people, had a good life in his occupation after the treatment? How miserable was he during the treatment? Is there any, even vis-a-vis which stage he was diagnosed? Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Any studies of those sort anywhere?
Very excellent point being taken up. I agree with you, because many a times when we give a treatment, we don't look at we just look at the numbers of the patients, like how many have survived, how many are without disease free. And that's why in the head neck cancer, the quality of life comes up very important question. So if you give a therapy and the patient is half the time having mucositis, having side effects of the therapy which you are going to give, that therapy means a meaningless. And that's why when the addition of these therapies, they had a very good analysis of a quality of life. Our nimotuzumab paper had it, the chemotherapy this also had it, and all of these lead to the improvement in the quality of life. So when we look at the end of these results and we think what has happened, how when you're giving toxic therapies and then still the patients are saying the quality of life has improved of them, it's basically the disease per se. When you look, the disease is so much debilitating. When they come with those uh, fungating growths, bad odors, bad smells. All of these affects their physical, their social, their sexual, their psychological state. And when you reduce those disease, you make them disappear, or you give them therapies that control their things. All of these tends to improve. Their mucositis tends to improve. Their cough tends to improve. Their pain tends to improve. Their whole social, their psychological tends to improve, and that's why the quality of life tends to improve for each and every of the therapies. And if that therapy doesn't show a quality of life benefit, it is purposeless. And so far now, all the approved therapies which we use, be it the radiation, be it the chemotherapies, be it the target therapies, be the immune therapies, now all trials take into account the quality of life. What they do is they do a simple questionnaire, the EORTC questionnaire, and they do it every 3 to 4 weeks to assess how the patient's domains are. So the questionnaire of that life has a physical domain, a psychological domain, a social domain, a sexual domain, and they score in each of their point, and they look cumulative over the periods that how the scores have improved. And yes, and that's why all these therapies have become a standard, because people tend to say that if you didn't give them therapy, so when we discuss with our patient, the first thing we also tell to them that yes, it's going to improve the quality of life. And that's why we are offering you at many times when they come in an advanced state or they become unfit for those therapies, there is no quality of life benefit. We tend to tell them that probably your disease is terminal right now, we don't have a quality of life care. So we also discuss that option with among themselves.
But are there any studies which showed how many people improved? I mean, are there any studies on that, sir?
So all of these studies which I said, they had among their secondary endpoints as
Okay.
quality of life benefit, and all of them had showed a quality of life benefit. So all these randomized trials, they had a quality of life as their secondary endpoint. No study would have a primary endpoint as a quality.
No, not primary, but at least secondary.
Secondary endpoint, every trial has it.
But there would be some numbers to it, and then you would have had some.
To put it to a domain, so the nimotuzumab, since I was one of the co-authors, 70% had a better quality of life. To put it in all domains, in physical, social.
Then agreed. Thank you.
Dr. Sanjay Rotito, sir, you want to ask something?
Actually, do you think biosimilars will reduce the cost of therapy in future?
I totally agree with sir. Many of the therapies, when initially proposed, having a quality of life and other benefits, come with a staggering price. But after the patency and other biosimilars, we have found in similar other cancers. And yes, so when cisplatin was as a chemotherapy or docetaxel was introduced, it was introduced in many thousand rupees. But right now it is available in few hundred rupees because of the introduction of the biosimilars. So definitely yes. Definitely yes.
Sandeep?
Yeah, Dr. Sudha, she is our past president and she has joined from Chennai. She's from Apollo Life. Yeah, ma'am.
Dr. Vikas, I have a compliment, comment, and a question. The compliment is, it was a very interesting talk, a lot of information given. Comment is, it brings back memories of the days when organ preservation was not there. If you had a laryngeal cancer, that was your end. You could live a life, but there's no quality. And when chemotherapy was available to start with. First question, I was part of a neurosurgical team. So the first question we would ask the patient is, do you have any relatives in US or Singapore to give you medicines? Because it was just not available. From that to the level where you said it's come from thousands to 100, it is an improvement. It gladdens your heart that the quality of life, like Dr. Shanbhag said, is better. My question is, when you have tried with all the three treatments, surgical, oncology, and radiation, what has been the percentage where you had to drop out of one or the other?
Thank you, Ma'am Sudha. I definitely am honored to be in the same platform, be sharing the screen with you. And I feel that there's every time when you look that a therapy fails. So with other cancers, it's usually the 10-20%, but with head neck cancers, it's the 30% or sometimes the 40% dropout rate. So because it's a debilitating disease, the disease of the head neck cancer patients per se, it proliferates at a very large rate. People tend to go out for an alternative measures. People tend to have a morbidity as well as mortality. So every time the modality, each modality phase, there's a 40% dropout. That if you have 100 patients taking a treatment of surgery, 40% tend to go to the second chemotherapy, 40% then go to the second line chemotherapies. That's how the dropout does occur with it. And its attribution is very variable. It's because the prior therapies were toxic, the performance status of the patient declines, as well as the disease sometimes becomes so aggressive, it spreads that it limits your tendency. So if it goes to the brain, then the patient sometimes become bedridden, and then you feel that we missed out on the therapies. So out of all the cancers, it's one of the debilitating and one of the most devastating disease to have it, because it gives you only one good chance to go about it.
Because earlier, trying one by one, the treatment was being given. Now it's a combination of everything to you hit it once for all and see what you can do.
Agreed.
And
Totally.
I wonder with our immunity and our, kind of life we have, whether many people would be able to tolerate the three together. That was the concern.
I totally agree with you, ma'am, because the problem is that everything we ape towards the West, and that's why at our centers and other centers, we are trying that more of Indian data should come, because
Yes.
our patients are not the same as the Western patients. And our patients are far worse in terms of nutrition build, in terms of social support, in terms of their psychological also, that the muscle mass is usually not the same of the Western. And on the contrary, our disease are much more worse. So they see a T2, T3 lesions, we see a T4 fungating lesions, and we see a stage 4 more common as compared to them. And I told you the biology also, the HPV negativity is more, the HPV positivity is less. And so everything in cumulative, we have a worse, but tough times never last, tough people do. And that's what we hope for.
We still hope for the best. Thank you.
So in concluding remarks, Dr. Vikas, you have given a very enthralling presentation, and to all of us who all are, we all are occupational health, industrial and public health physicians. So we all believe in preventive aspect, and yes, we know that this head and neck cancer is a very devastating disease, and as Dr. Shanbhag sir has rightly said, it affects your quality of life, and it affects your social status also. And for prevention, we have to have a common risk factor approach, and that I hope you will also agree. Then we need to control the environment. We need to improve upon our lifestyle. We should have safe water, adequate food, good hygiene, public and professional education about early sign and symptoms. Then early diagnosis and intervention is required. Then evidence-based treatment appropriate to the available resources and the people who can afford them, and thoughtful rehabilitation and the palliative care. and more knowledge to all our industrial physician and occupational physicians, so that we are not master of this particular field, but we should be knowing all these latest developments, because it is the knowledge which ultimately matters. So thank you, Dr. Vikas. We have a small token of appreciation for you. We have designed a small certificate that you will send through email to you. And this is actually a new norm for every one of us. So this is about the certificate of appreciation from our association, and we would definitely like to connect with you when we can physically meet and have some more details in some coming conferences. So still we are in COVID situation, and definitely you also take care, and we also would like to discuss more about the evolving situation of this COVID-19 from our Senior Vice President, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain. He is a specialist in railway services, and would like you also to remain for the presentation. If you don't have any other engagement, then for the time being, may I request Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, sir, to share his screen and give us some thoughtful insights of the COVID evolving situation, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep. This has been very useful interaction. Inconvenience because of internet connection is regretted, but it was inevitable these days that the environment is as it is. So I straight away coronavirus dispute of WHO. If you see last time, our third period gap has been narrowed. Gap between and deal, which is second and third, is just less than today.
Sorry, your voice is breaking. Dr. Rajiv, your voice is breaking.
I think still there is some internet problem.
Rajiv, sir, your voice is breaking. You can put off your video.
Dr. Rajiv, what you can do, you can show us your slide presentation with minimal audio, and we can go through and we can read.
We all know that this COVID situation is still not under control, and because of the huge population in India, more than 130 crore now, and the ramped up testing by the ICMR and the accredited labs, now we are almost doing more than 10 lakh tests daily. So we should not be afraid of the increase in numbers, because numbers will definitely rise, but testing strategy need to be there in place, because if we are testing, then we are definitely identifying the culprits and infected people, and then we can isolate them. And
Dr. Sandeep, yeah. Now I'm audible.
You're audible. Your voice is breaking, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
So I will rush through the slides.
Yes.
What I do is, it can be understood by the audience.
Yeah.
We are the highest deaths and highest cases. So very shortly, we are touching
Dr. Rajiv, you run through the slides. We can see the slide even without commentary, because we are not getting your voice.
What we are seeing from the slide, because of our increased numbers, I think we'll be crossing Brazil by tomorrow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So in the numbers, so we'll be number 2 after United States of America. And in last 2 days, it has become quite clear that India is nowhere close to the peak or the plateau. We are still having rising in number of the cases, and the deaths are also equally high. More than 1,000 deaths are being reported from India daily, almost daily. And yesterday, there was a news testing strategy which was released by ICMR. That was a strategy 5, in which they say that 14 days quarantine is mandatory for all planned surgeries. So is it an institutional quarantine, sir, or is it a voluntary quarantine? You can means, or you have to just under supervision you need to be quarantined.
Quarantine.
Pardon, sir?
Quarantine.
Yeah.
Not institutional quarantine, but being promoted.
Yeah, we need to be under supervision of someone, the treating doctor. Yeah.
Yes, there are which are.
There is something
So
serious.
we are 1 lakh cases every day by 21.
Yeah. So.
Dr. Rajiv, can you show your slides only? We can read and we can go through.
Yeah, that will be a better option.
Yes.
Because of the bad weather, might be.
Net is normally not affected by the bad weather.
Yeah.
It is the satellite signals. Unless this net is working through satellite signal.
Is it visible?
Yeah.
It is visible.
Lights are visible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your voice is also clear now.
Now we have see the growth rate is also now clear reversal from the decline. This is the 2.2% cases growing and remained steady for a week. 7-day average new cases, no sign of slowing. Daily active cases are rebounding, 1.7%. Tests are growing at 2.4%. Daily test average is 10.5 lakh for the past 7 days. And daily deaths are more than 1,000, the highest in the world. This is the real situation in hotspots. 10 biggest hotspots out of these, 4 are in Maharashtra: Mumbai, Thane, Pune, and Nasik. So new hotspots have come up in Maharashtra, and Andhra Pradesh is still going strong. This is a state of daily new this is reported and in almost all the states. This is, if you focus your attention on the gray portion, it is increasing. So active cases are increasing. Very few states, they are declining. Almost all the states, they are increasing. This is a graph showing daily new cases, 7-day moving average for the top 25 districts. Most of the districts, 50 districts in India, are showing increasing trend. And 69% of cases belong to these 50 districts in India. This is the rest 25 districts all across are increasing. All the 50 districts, most of the districts are showing increasing trend of new cases. In the end, I would say, give you greetings for the Teachers' Day today. Now we have range of teachers from Professor C.V. Raman to the ubiquitous teacher in Patna, and of course our first president, the President of India, Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. Once again, I greet Dr. Sandeep Sharma on his birthday. Thank you so much, and sorry for the glitches.
So can you throw some light on the vaccine status right now?
Vaccine is all the more difficult now because of simple reason, the ethical issues have assumed foremost importance now. Even WHO is standing up and saying safety and efficacy. They will first examine that, so it will be further delayed. even the Russian vaccine is now come into play. The US politics is also playing its role. The international regulatory bodies have become more strong, and they shall not allow unless they are satisfied that efficacy and safety are never compromised. Because the simple reason the investment made shall be huge, and any setback due to any adverse effect shall be devastating for the entire effort that has gone into making the vaccine. So I think that is the confounding factor which is developed in the last week for the vaccine.
Rajivji, Shanbag here.
Yes.
Just the Lancet article, which is now giving a thumbs up to the Russian vaccine.
Yes.
Any comments on that?
I feel now they were, of course, serious players from the beginning, only that international recognition was not forthcoming. Now international recognition has come forward, and India also has signed an agreement with the Russians for further development.
Yes.
So that's a positive sign. I think science should replace politics in the entire development of vaccine, and this is a welcome step. And there would be more collaboration, and shortly you will see COVAX facility and Russian vaccine development with international developmental partners. There will be more pooling of resources, which is very good trend.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and I agree with you more than anything else about the politics being kept out of the vaccine.
Yeah, certainly.
Dr. Rajiv sir, can you throw some more light than this rise in number of the cases right now in India? Is it because of the fluctuation in the first wave, or is it the second wave which is now coming?
No. We have not reached the first wave peak. We are still going up the hill on the first peak because of the sheer size of our country. We are infection is going deeper and deeper into smaller districts where the movement of transport is less, movement of people is less. So you will keep on seeing this for some time. Prediction is at least for the next 2 months, this will continue to grow. The only way it can be done, controlled or lessened, is increased testing, tracing, and that is what is being done in most of the cities where new cases are coming out, the graph is going up. The issue which is again important is that testing rates have to increase. Unless the testing rates increase, the test positivity rate will not come down. People will not be allowed to isolate. So what has happened is now India is on a serious path to even further strengthen our testing rates to 15 lakh. So you must have seen 11.5 lakh we've achieved. We are on path to achieve 15 lakh tests per day. And you must have seen another issue which has been resolved yesterday by Department of Health Research is revising the testing strategy. You don't need a doctor's prescription now. You can do it when you want. And also there are 15 criteria which have been revised. So 15 criteria will ensure that you get the test when you want. Anybody who feels that he needs to be tested, he can be tested. Any person going for surgery, antenatal care, there is any person in the hospital, if you see the testing criteria in the hospital, inside the containment zones, outside the containment zone, and people who do not have any symptoms, they can also go for testing straight away. They do not need to go to a doctor first, have a prescription. The only requirement now is the testing lab should upload the data on the ICMR portal, which is a welcome trend. This will further strengthen the positivity rate and people's ability to participate in the process of testing, isolation, and treatment. Another good thing which has happened in the last week is we have now got substantial identification of cases which require ICU, which require ventilator, and also the disease is showing less lethality. So people have got more confidence, they're coming out and recognizing that they will participate in the isolation process, which is very good. Earlier, that stigma has gone away, and now people are coming forward. I've seen in many offices, people are coming in hordes to get the rapid antigen tests. And what I'm seeing is testing positivity, even in rapid antigen tests, even in Delhi, is coming to be 8 to 9% positive. So that's the beginning of the isolation process. Unless this was done, the only red flag I'm saying now, all efforts have to go to Maharashtra now. The Maharashtra is on a spree. There are 5 big cities, 5 big districts, and number of smaller districts which are going a very steep upward trend. So unless this is done, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra need to be the focus states in our country now. They need to strengthen their testing rates substantially. Substantially means twice the rates, because they are testing much below even the national average.
As far as the stigma is concerned, the government of Punjab has issued the orders that anybody found positive and in isolation or home quarantine, there will not be any poster outside his home. And the already existing poster has been removed. This is one. Number 2.
That's a very welcome trend, actually.
Yes. Because now people themselves are taking care of all these things. And number 2,
yes.
The government is coming up with an idea that open up these testing facilities at major railway stations or major interstate bus stands, where there is a lot of movement of the people, and while moving around, they can go through the test as well. I mean,
even in Delhi yesterday, if you see ISBT Anand Vihar, 3,600 people were tested yesterday, only one day. 3,636 people were tested yesterday. And New Delhi railway station and Old Delhi railway station, there are 4 teams of rapid antigen testing teams of government of NCT of Delhi. So ISBT, so people who are coming from Delhi, coming to Delhi are being tested. Even the testing center has been set up at the international terminal now. Even transit passengers are now being allowed to be tested and move forward to the destination cities. So that's a welcome trend.
Yes, welcome trend.
But the trouble in Punjab is that testing rates are not increasing. If you had seen the Punjab slide, that is I think a negative trend, and also their test positivity rates are not coming down. For the last 14 days,
that stigma
last
is
14 days they test positive. Yes, but the issue is they have to go deeper for testing, deeper into smaller districts and smaller cities, because number of cases are getting found over there. So then the testing is not increasing, which is a negative, I think, step.
Sir, although this number of cases is understandable, it is rising because of testing. Case fatality rate is also low if we see the data and other things. But now the number of fatalities because of COVID, they are rising. They are now more than 1,000 almost cases per day. So if we see the Indian data which was published earlier by Government of India, the number of deaths which are attributable to non-communicable disease, to respiratory disease or many other disease, they are much higher than the figures which we have right now because of the COVID. It means the number of deaths can rise also in this scenario, or we are underreporting the deaths.
This is an interesting issue which requires scientific examination. As you're aware, in India, medical certification of death, even in normal times, is not up to the mark. Even in cases where the medical certification is there, it is not appropriately filled in relation to the primary antecedent cause and confounding cause or antecedent diseases that the death has occurred. Now, in India, medical certification of death in urban areas, even in good medical colleges, is not standardized. At the moment, whatever deaths are being reported, they are further require scrutiny, and later there will be a correction made when scientific study is made on the true number of deaths. As you know, international scientific studies are showing deaths number of deaths can be traced through autopsies as well, verbal autopsy as well. That I think India will have to do later. At the moment, whatever numbers are coming out, that is an understatement. Because because science follows irrespective of the state or the country. What is happening in US, or Brazil, or any other country in Europe, deaths are a bit on the lower side, and that cannot be explained by the case fatality rate as recorded in most of the medical colleges. And mortality rates and case fatality rate, they have to converge. They are not converging at the moment. So there is a chance that number of deaths are being missed. So, but that is a not important. Current important information is that the trend is showing increasing number of deaths as reported. More than 1,000 deaths. Nowhere, even in countries where the death reporting is very good, they are also reporting less than 800 or 700 deaths per day. And India is reporting more than 1,000, even in cases when India does not have a complete 100% medical certification of deaths. There may be deaths which may be occurring at home or in outside home, but outside health facilities. So they will have to be factored in based on other corroborating data, either from cremation grounds or from other sources. There's no other way.
Okay. So one more query, sir. If someone is like some elderly person, he is suffering from comorbidities. He is admitted for those comorbidities, and suddenly he is diagnosed as COVID positive. So, and he ultimately, because of this deterioration of his disease, he expires. And should it be attributed to COVID, or is it because of the comorbidities?
Yes, this is important to understand. Immediate cause of death will remain COVID, because the simple reason the person suffered from COVID because he was having other diseases or comorbidities. So immediate cause of death shall be COVID-19, and also other comorbidities will also be recorded in the standard cause of death certification as per ICD-10 criteria or ICD-11 criteria.
Okay. Right. So if there is any other question from the learned panelists, then we can have it. Otherwise, it was a nice fruitful discussion today.
Yeah.
I only want to make one comment, Sandeep.
Yes, sir.
On this deaths part of it. As far as my knowledge goes, there will be no cremation ground who will accept to cremate a body without a death certificate. It has to be reported to the local authority, the municipal corporation or the Gram Panchayat or whatever it may be. And once they give a disposal certificate, then only the cremation takes place. So the majority of the cases in India, I don't think are going unrecorded. The deaths will be there. Only thing is what it is reported because of, we don't know. That I agree with Rajiv that, you know, everybody is not expert at writing death certificates. But the system, the logistics of, you know, cremating a person or you know, taking care of the mortal remains are very clear and very straightforward, that the death certificate has to be given to the local authority. Local authority will give you a disposal certificate, and that has to be presented to the cremation ground for cremation to take place. So I think
in India, unfortunately, the situation is, I beg to differ, because in India, in rural areas, Panchayat is responsible and cremation grounds are not there. So in terms of proportion of cases with medical certification, we are in India, the fact is that only 30% have medical certification of death. Other 70% deaths are not medically certified in India. So that's an unfortunate reality in our country. So in rural areas, the reporting is very poor. That is as per the Registrar General of India mortality reports. Only in urban areas, we have medical certification. Rural areas, there is no medical certification. It's laid, the person is brought to the cremation ground,
I think again there is
there's
a
no medical.
No, I don't know. You may be right, Rajiv, but nowadays with this Aadhaar and all that, when somebody dies, they even ask the Aadhaar card, so that it is now getting all tightened up everywhere. So I think it will improve if it is not yet improved. And the systems are taking place. Like when my wife died and they asked for the Aadhaar card, I gave the number. In the next election, her name was removed from the voting list automatically. There was nothing else. So the systems are working and they are in sync. So you may say you are living in an urban area. That's fine. But if otherwise, you will not know how many people have died. You will not know until the census takes place. So I have my doubt, but I know there are loopholes. But I think it is improving now. The recording is improving.
The percentage may be different.
Yeah.
But the question Dr. Sandeep was asking was to COVID. So that requires medical certification and
Absolutely.
testing.
Absolutely.
Which is not happening on the ground.
In a COVID, I can understand, there again, as you said, politics comes into the picture. Oh, somebody will put some pressure. That all, I agree with you. That, even in the number of testing, opposition will say test more, person who is in power will say test less. All those things will happen. So,
if you recollect, in UK, similar situation happened. More deaths were occurring in care homes, old persons care homes.
Yes.
And they were not getting recorded.
Correct.
India, though care homes are not there, but that is more than offset by rural areas where reporting of deaths, medical certification is very, very deficient. It is not generally medically certified.
Anyway, let us agree to disagree.
right.
So thank you all very much, sir, for joining this webinar. And thank you all for the warm wishes you have bestowed on me, sir. Thank you all very much. Your support is required and your well wishes are required by me, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Always there. All the best,
Thank you.
Daliti.
Thank you, sir.
Happy birthday again.
Thank you, madam.
Yes,
Thank you,
happy
sir.
birthday again.
Because of COVID, we can't give you birthday bumps.
Not even a party or a cake.
Yes.
That will remain due, sir.
We'll make up for it, Sandeep.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, sir. Thank